Guys. I thought I would go over a problem from lesson 5 in the review chapter with you guys, just to freshen up some things, make sure you kind of understand everything. It goes over a few different concepts, but I wanted to make sure I reviewed quadratics and make sure you guys remember how to use the quadratic formula and all of that good stuff. So let's try a problem. Um, so let's say that I give you the problem of, and I'm going to have to move this screen so you guys stay with me. If I ask you guys to take f of x, which is equal to 2x squared minus 6x plus 1. Okay, so there, we have our function. Let's say I ask you guys to find the vertex, and I don't know if I'm able to change my color here. Um, So for the first thing, we're going to find our vertex. And I try to keep my face where you can see it a little bit. So the question is, how do you find the vertex of a quadratic? All right. Well, let's back up a little bit more. How do I even know that what I have written in black there, f of x, how do I know that that is even a quadratic? Well, if you remember from maybe past algebra classes, quadratics are written in the form of f of x is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c, right? So maybe I can change my colors here. So your A is that 2, okay? And the ax squared, your A is 2. Then your bx, your B for this problem would actually be -6. Then if we look a little bit further down, we have a C in our quadratics. So for our f of x that is given to us, our C is equal to 1. So I know that I have a quadratic, and now we know what our A, B, and C is. Okay. So I want to find my vertex for my quadratic. What is your vertex? Okay. If you have a quadratic, if you were to graph it, you would get one of two things. You would get a quadratic that looks something like this, and it disappeared on me. It's going to open up or it's going to open down. But when you're finding your vertex, what you're finding are these points here. That's the vertex. Your vertex is that maximum that you have on that quadratic, or it's that minimum. So we have one of the other when you have a quadratic. You cannot have both. It's that maximum point. It's that turning point on that graph there. So that's what we want to find without graphing our quadratic. So we have a formula. If you look in your notes, if you look, remember, online, you can access your textbook online. You have PowerPoints online. Um, so your PowerPoints are your notes. All right. So if you access your notes, it's going to tell you how to find your vertex. It's going to give you an equation. The equation is x is equal to the opposite of b divided by 2a. And if you notice, I said opposite of b, not negative b. That helps us remember to always change the sign. So let's say the opposite of b. So our vertex, oh man, let's see, I changed my screen. Okay, so my vertex is found by taking our b, and maybe I should change my color so we don't get confused. So my b here is at -6. So the opposite of -6 is actually going to be a +6. So it's going to be a +6 divided by 2. The 2 just, it comes from the formula there, 2. And my a over there, my a is equal to 2. So it's going to be 2 times a, which is also 2. Right? So I kind of put that in color so we can follow along. Now, if I simplify that, what I get is that x is equal to 6 divided by 4, which is equal to 3 halves when we reduce the fraction. Um, so what I have is my x coordinate of my vertex. This is where, and I want to write this down because it depends on when you go do your My Math Lab homework. Sometimes it asks you where the vertex is. as in it might just want one number. So, and you know, not an ordered pair. So if it's asking where your vertex is, and it's not asking for the entire ordered pair, what it's asking for is this. It's asking for, you know, as in where on the x-axis does that vertex occur. So on the x-axis, that vertex would occur at 3/2. Now, what if I wanted to find my ordered pair? You know, the coordinate. What I would then do is take that 3/2 and I would substitute that back into that original equation. So now that would give me f of 3/2, which is going to give me 2 times 3/2 squared minus 6 times 3/2. Now I'm running out of room here. I hope you guys have everything over here, so I'm going to erase some of that. Okay, let's clean up my screen. So minus 6x plus 1. All right, so let's simplify this and let's see what we get here. So I don't want all of this. So now what I want to do is I want to square that 3/2. So that's going to give me 2 times, I have that 9/4 minus, now I'm not going to do this with the calculator. Let's just try to practice multiplying this number times this fraction. So what I would do is take that 6 and divide it by 2, which gives me 3. Then 3 times 3 gives me 9. So it's going to be minus 9 plus 1. Right, so now this 2 and this 4 kind of simplifies one another, and it leaves me with the 2 in the bottom. So what I end up with is that 9/2 minus 9 plus 1. And I could actually simplify that minus 9 or negative 9 plus 1 gives me -8. And so without using a calculator, let's try to combine these without using a calculator. We understand that's 9/2, of course. Now, if I would take that 8 and I want to write it with a denominator of 2, that's going to be minus 16/2. Okay, so now I can see I have my common denominator. So now all you have to do is take that 9 and subtract your 16 from it. So if I have 9 minus 16, that's going to give me, excuse me just a minute, let me turn my lights on. That should give us -7/2. So what we have here, we have now our x coordinate, that's where my vertex occurs. And what I figured out here is what the value is of that vertex. So if I put it together in an ordered pair, you have where it occurs, you have what the value of that vertex is. So I found my vertex, okay? So I did a little bit of everything. I did a little extra, okay? But then for lesson 5, finding the vertex is not the only thing you're going to have to do with a quadratic. You're going to also have to find your roots. So if we think about a quadratic, let me sketch this out in the corner. You know, you have your coordinate plane here. You have your x and your y axis. Usually, not every single time, but usually when you graph a quadratic, what happens is it crosses that x-axis at some point. It can cross it at 1 point, 2 places, or it may not cross it at all. But what I drew here up in the corner is just a sketch of a quadratic that crosses the x-axis twice. Now we can call those roots, we can call those solutions, we can call those x coordinates, we can call those the zeros, depending on the problem and how it's worded. They may label it differently, but I know in the textbooks, and I'm assuming your homework is going to use the same terminology. It's asking us to find the roots of the quadratic. Okay, so let's take this quadratic that we already have. I know where the vertex occurs. Let's actually find the roots of this quadratic. And like I said, I don't use this a whole lot. I don't use this whiteboard a whole lot, so I'm not sure exactly. Let's just erase it. I don't want to mess with anything. Okay. You can always pause the video if I'm moving too fast. You can always pause the video, slow it down, take notes, write this stuff down. If you don't understand what I did, send me an email. I can always make a video. I think I'm figuring this stuff out pretty quickly. Okay, so the second part we want to do, we want to find our roots of this quadratic. So how do you find the roots of a quadratic? There's a few different ways. One, you can just graph it. Try in your calculator, figure out, where it crosses the x-intercepts or the x-axis. But the problem with that is that your graph will not always cross the x-axis at pretty numbers. When I say pretty numbers, I mean like whole numbers, right? Zero, or let's just say rational numbers, which are numbers that can be written in the form of a fraction or a whole number. There are irrational numbers. Those decimals that's in your table or on the graph, they're not going to work in my math lab. They want the exact answer, precise answer, and you can't give decimals. Okay. So in other words, graphing does not always work. It gives you an estimate, it does not give you the actual answer. Um, Sometimes we can factor. Okay, you remember how to factor using maybe depending on what your teacher called it. Some they have some methods that helps. You have like the Texas method, the star method. But when you have a quadratic, a lot of times we try to factor it, and sometimes you can factor them, and sometimes you can't. So that's not always, um, I guess, a go-to method. But the method that will always work and will always give you your roots is the quadratic formula. So this is what you need, and this is what you should always just apply. So the quadratic formula is x equals the opposite of b plus and minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Now, I did erase what my a, my b, and my c is, but it's still underlined. My a was in green. It's that 2. My b is at -6, and my c is 1. You need to remember the quadratic formula, right? But other than that, all you do is just kind of plug in. You take your values and you substitute them into that equation. So my roots is going to be the opposite of b. So b is already -6. So the opposite of -6 is that +6 plus and minus the square root of my b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Took my numbers, I substitute them in. If I'm going too fast, you can slow it down. Okay. Y'all bear with me. This is a touch screen, so every once in a while it wants to move, go somewhere else. So let's simplify. When you're simplifying the quadratic formula, what you want to do is take everything that you have here. Let's see if I can highlight everything up under that radical. You want to simplify that first. Okay, so I have that -6 squared. That's going to give me 36 minus, then 4 times 2 times 1. 4 times 2 is 8. 8 times 1 is 8. So that's going to be 36 minus 8 all over 4. If I subtract 8 from 36, that is going to give me 28 divided by 4. Okay. Now that looks like it is almost simplified. It's very close. And this is the reason I wanted to go over this with you guys. You cannot put this in my math lab. This is not the answer. And maybe I should make a note that that is not the answer because this is not simplified. You have to reduce the fraction. I mean, it is a fraction. It looks a little bit different, but you need to reduce it. You have to simplify it. And if you look, let's use a better color for my highlighter. I have this radical here the square root of 28. I can simplify that, guys. And I don't know if you remember from maybe past math classes, and teachers teach it differently, but I just go old school and I just take that number that's under that radical, that 28, and I make a factor tree. You want to break it down into your prime factorization, all of your primes. So I know that 7 times 4 gives me 28. 7 is prime, but 4 is not, so I can break that down a little bit more. Okay, so now that's my prime factorization for 28. Now, what I really have here is 2 times 2 times 7 up under that radical. And if you remember, to simplify a radical, what you need is groups of 2 when you're talking about a square root. So I circle my groups of 2 and I make a note that that will come outside. I will bring that outside of that radical, and that will become 2 square roots of 7. Okay, so if I rewrite this is going to give me 6 plus and minus 2 square roots of 7 over, I don't want to write down here for some reason, so let me move that. Let's bring it up here, don't want to write. So that gives me 6 plus and minus 2 square roots of 7 over 4. And if you notice, we have a 6, right? We have a 2, and then we have a 4. All of those are divisible by 2. So I can divide all of those by 2, which means I can reduce that fraction. And my reduced fraction will now be, let's get my pen back. That's going to give me 3 plus and minus 1 square root of 7 all over 2. And that is the roots. Those are the roots. I have 2 roots. Now keep that in mind. My computer is wanting to mess up for some reason. I have 2 roots there. One root is actually 3 plus the square root of 7 divided by 2. And my other root is actually 3 minus the square root of 7 divided by 2. So that's it. It's just a quick video on finding the vertex of a quadratic and finding the roots of a quadratic. I hope this helped. If you guys have some questions, shoot me an email and let me know.